Hello, guys and gals, me Mudahar, and yes, indeedy, the United States government is in fact suing Google. Now, if you know one thing Muda is passionate about, one thing that Muda is just all crazy about is talking about user privacy, safety, security. We made videos on Apple, we made videos on TikTok, we made videos on Facebook, and Google is no exception. Google is one of the biggest tech companies in the world right now. In fact, Google is probably the biggest search engine provider right now. Google might also be one of the biggest video providers as well through YouTube. Google pretty much does everything, and Google does everything really good. To give Google all the praise that I can, their free services, provided you give them your personal data, are actually fairly decent for the most part. In fact, I would wager to say that Google probably makes better services than 90% of the tech firms out there when it comes to whatever they provide. But that doesn't excuse Google from being tossed into antitrust lawsuits. Now, for those of you who don't know what antitrust lawsuits is basically what the U.S. government is trying to make sense here is to tell people that Google, in fact, runs a monopoly. Now, when it comes to the definition of monopoly, let's talk about just monopoly power real quick, at least in the United States antitrust lawsuit systems, okay? The ability of one company to control prices or exclude competition in a particular market. It is a requirement for an offense of monopolization, which is prohibited under Section 2 of the Sherman Act. Courts may evaluate the following factors to determine whether a company has monopoly power. Ease with which a market may enter the company. That's one we're going to be talking about. Market share in a relevant market. Size and strength of competing companies. Pricing trends and practices in the industry, and ability of consumers to switch to comparable goods. Strength of demand. So these are 6 points, all right? Now, of course, this isn't completely, all the way there, but this is just sort of giving you an idea of what monopolies are about. Now, the United States Department of Justice decided to file an antitrust lawsuit against Google, claiming that they control about 90% of global web searches. Now, that being said, it does sound like the ball is in their court. But understand something, Google's got lawyers that are smarter than you, me, the entire world combined. And they probably get paid 3-4 times the amount a US DOJ lawyer probably gets paid too. And that's why they work extra hard to make sure Google is clean of any possible issues legally. To the point where they were so brazen to make an actual response. A deeply flawed lawsuit that would do nothing to help consumers. Oh, let's sit down and talk about this one, boys and girls. Google search has put the world's information at the fingertips of over 1 billion people. Our engineers are working around the clock to offer the best search engine possible, constantly improving and fine-tuning it, which I completely agree. Today's lawsuit by the Department of Justice is deeply flawed. Okay, well, let's figure out why. People use Google because they choose to, not because they're forced to, or because they can't find alternatives. The lawsuit would do nothing to help consumers. Now, that paragraph they stated here, it's actually very true. Google is not putting a gun to anyone's head and telling them you have to use their service. People use Google because it's pretty much ingrained into our culture, and quite honestly, it is probably one of the best search engines out there, okay? Nobody's going to use off-brand Google, which we all know is Bing, and whatnot, okay? Now, let's talk about specifics here, as Google says. The department's complaint relies on dubious antitrust arguments to criticize our efforts to make Google search easily available to people. Yes, like countless other businesses, we pay to promote our services, just like a cereal brand might pay a supermarket to stock its products at the end of a row or on a shelf at eye level. For digital surfaces, when you first buy a device, it has a kind of home screen. On mobile, that shelf is controlled by Apple, as well as companies like AT&T, Verizon, Samsung, and LG. On desktop computers, that shelf space is overwhelmingly controlled by Microsoft. So what they're talking about is basically dominating markets in certain sectors, right? So for cell phone markets, they're saying Apple pretty much dominates that mobile market, right? Which is fairly true if you're talking about that high-end market. I mean, Apple being one sole smartphone provider, if they own 30% of the smartphone market, dude, that's 30% of just Apple in the marketplace, right? That's crazy. All right, the other pie is basically being shared amongst every other smartphone manufacturer. When they're talking about Microsoft Windows, yeah, it's crazy. Windows has has one of the highest market shares on computer desktops. Every one of their grandma uses Windows 10. All right, I use Linux, but I'm literally part of the 1% of people that use Linux as their primary operating system. There are more Mac OS users than Linux users, but combining Mac OS and Linux doesn't even come close to Microsoft's dominance in the desktop computing marketplace. Hell, the laptop computer marketplace too. So Google's 100% right on this scenario. They're absolutely right. If you look at the search engines, however, right, where they mention other competitors to their searches, you can see that Google comes in at 92.2% worldwide. 2020 worldwide, Google is dominating, right? Bing is at 2.8%. 2.8. It doesn't matter. They might be your competition, but dog, they're not doing jack. Yahoo comes after. Who here uses Yahoo? All right, come on now. I mean, Yandex is coming at 0.5%. You can't tell me the Russian search engines are going to do anything. Dude, DuckDuckGo could only dream of touching 1% to combat Google. You guys dominate the search industry. Let's not joke about it. Hell, if you go to certain countries, like let's just go right here to India, for instance, right? You're owning 98% of Indian market share alone on Google. These other guys can't even they can't come close, okay? I haven't heard of what Ecosia is, but 0.01% of Indians use it. That's just to test it out, probably. So yeah, I think it's kind of a flawed argument on Google's end to just say, oh, there's competitors. Yeah, but you do dominate that search engine industry. Let's not joke about it. Now, here they talk about our agreements with Apple and other device makers and carriers are no different from the agreements that many other companies have traditionally used to distribute software. So what they're basically doing is talking about the fact that Google is bundled into a lot of popular products. Like, let's say that you get an Apple product, right? Now, I don't know how true this is. I haven't bought an iPhone since the iPhone 10. But if, say, YouTube is bundled alongside your iPhone purchase, right? Let's say any Google application, or here's a better example. And when you open up Safari on your Apple product, right, the search engine that's set by default is Google. Now, there are other search engines that are available on Apple Safari, like Bing, like Yahoo, but the default is always Google. How many people do you think are just going to switch off the default? All right. Do you think they're going to manually go to the settings on Safari for their iPhone and change it to Bing? No, I'm pretty sure almost 99% of people using an iPhone are just going to stick with the default Google placement anyways. And that's how you kind of win, right? You pretty much win because you're the sole choice. Well, not the sole choice, but you're the choice that people are probably going to stick with the most because that's the default choice on the device. Now, here they talk about Apple devices in specific, right, where they feature Google search in the Safari browser, right? But they do say that you can, in fact, change to Yahoo, Bing, or DuckDuckGo. Again, how many people do you know that are switching from the base default, right? Just putting it out there. Google doesn't come preloaded on Windows devices. Microsoft preloads its Edge browser on Windows devices, where Bing is the default search engine. That's true. When you install Windows 10, the only internet client that you get, the only browser you're getting is Microsoft Edge. And Microsoft Edge preloads the fuck out of Bing. In fact, Microsoft Edge, people pretty much, I'm sure, use Edge for the most part to just download Chrome anyways. It's why when you search Google Chrome on the Edge browser, it's like, no, please try Edge. Just don't immediately switch. No. Let's be real here, okay? Let's be real. They're absolutely 100% right about this situation, but I wish they gave more context. And I wish you could look at the data of how many people use the Edge browser. In fact, I'm sure Google has this, right? How many people go to the Chrome download page that have the user agent of the Microsoft Edge browser? That would be an interesting survey I want to check. Now, here they also talk about Android, where in the lawsuit, they talked about the fact that the app stores, the Google Play Store, was a dominant store, which the United States government is factually incorrect on, at least for Google. There are other rival app stores. I don't know why they showed Samsung Browser. I guess it's a rival app. But they showed Samsung Galaxy Store. There's also Amazon's App Store. There's plenty of third-party app stores you can download on Android. So to say that Google has a monopoly is factually incorrect. In fact, there are some handset manufacturers around the world that don't even install Google services on Android. Android is an open-source operating system that anybody can download, anybody can deploy on their devices, and in doing so can create their own app ecosystem if they wanted to. This is not Apple's iOS, where Apple solely dominates the software. This is purely open source. Anybody can contribute, anybody can use it, provided they also give back to it. Now, they also talk about downloading search engines, which is factually true. You can download any search engine on Android and even iOS. All right, so this isn't something that the US government is absolutely right on at all. Setting a search widget. I mean, Google literally wins this 100% if we had to just go by the argument. Is what they're providing here is proper semantics of this situation, right? They're actually giving you proper showcases as to how they're not technically a monopoly. The bigger point the lawsuit misses. So let's cover this one. This is an interesting fact. The bigger point is people don't use Google services because they have to. They use it because they choose to. This isn't the dial-up 1990s when changing services was slow and difficult and often required you to buy and install software with a CD-ROM. Today, you can easily download your apps of choice in a matter of seconds, faster than you can walk to another aisle in a grocery store. That's true. Anybody can download any crappy app on the app stores or play stores and be content with it. The lawsuit claims that Americans aren't sophisticated enough to do this. I don't know if the US DOJ is playing like really stupid, but come on, anybody can download apps. Let's not be stupid about it. Now, here they also mentioned there's another area in which the lawsuit is wrong about how Americans use the internet. This is a really important part. It claims that we compete only with other general search engines, but that's demonstrably wrong. People find information in a lot of ways. They look for news on Twitter, flights on Kayak and Expedia, restaurants on OpenTable, recommendations on Instagram and Pinterest. And when searching to buy something, around 60% of Americans start on Amazon. Every day, Americans choose to use all these services and thousands more. Now, what's also interesting about this, okay, if we go back to the definition of monopoly power, there's one thing that I wanted to talk about: ease with which a competitor may enter a market. Now, Google may have a lot of their money coming from advertising, but without a doubt, they have massive dominance in search engine stuff. If you go to the search engine market share once again, just generally, 92% is Google owned. Their second biggest competitor is Bing at 2.8%. So your other big competitor, that by the way isn't even really competition, isn't even coming close to you, is owned by another multi-billion-dollar company that has had a shoddy history of antitrust. In fact, I have a big video just on Microsoft, their dark, evil history coming up, because when it comes to antitrust, Microsoft is the one bad boy to watch for. But if that's your competition, I don't know what to tell you. If your competition is Amazon and Facebook, can you understand what I mean by ease with which a market may enter, ease by which a competitor may enter the market? Guys, multi-billion-dollar companies. It's to a point where when you looked in the 1990s, these dot-com companies were basically startups, right? Google had their motto, don't be evil. They were basically just starting up, garage style production. Okay, this was daddy's first .com on the block. And now Google alongside Microsoft, alongside Apple, are world multinational billion-dollar companies. Almost $1 trillion in evaluation for some of these guys. That's a lot of cash. That's a lot of capital. This competition shows you that at least to compete with each other, you need to have this massive amount of capital. Capital that we're looking at, oil companies haven't had this much capital that tech companies now have. So it's kind of fucking insane. Market share in the relevant market, this isn't even fair. 92% versus 2.8%? Come on. That's a multi-billion-dollar company against another multi-billion-dollar company. Now, this is sort of a little bit tinfoil hat-ish, all right, but I'm going to play out a scenario. Now, this scenario isn't exactly true. There's no there's no evidence for it. It's just a hypothetical that I'm going at with, right? Now, Google, being the fact that they own one of the most used search engines, can display ads to all the people that are searching, right? So let's say that, some new person on the block makes an application, right? Like a game streaming service, right? Like, hey guys, stream games at 120 frames per second, good quality, all of that, right? So they make a service and it does okay. They realize, man, I can go on Google and just advertise my service. So they give Google $50,000, $100,000. They advertise their service, and bam, they're getting more traction, more signups. People are coming to their service. Now, Google could theoretically just make the exact same service, right? Like the exact same game streaming service, like let's say Stadia. It may not be as good, but Google can afford to undercut the shit out of you because Google has all these connections. They have all these, agreements with companies. They can get games cheaper and deploy them better and have better engineering teams. So they can win literally by having a crap ton of capital and resources at their hand. Now, they can then take that service, go online, advertise. They can pay themselves 50 times whatever you paid them to advertise their service on Google. From a tax perspective, hey, that's a nice expenditure on the advertising department. Then Stadia suddenly blows up more than your service. And because Google can afford to undercut you, even if their service may not be as good as your indie mom and pop solution, they're still gonna dominate. And the best part about it is this. They can go to a courtroom and probably argue very successfully that this is an antitrust. They are getting away. All right, because they have competition. You're the competition, right? But you can conveniently leave out the fact that they're a multi-billion-dollar company with 90% revenue share in one of the most like populated like search engines out in the world. Okay, like you get what I'm trying to say. Even if like you understand the hypothetical I'm placing in front of you and how very easily it could happen. Not too long ago, Twitter was caught basically censoring one like political party. It's to a point. This lawsuit exists because listen, I get antitrust is a big issue. The U.S. government isn't wrong, but let's not deny the fact that the U.S. government basically initiated this lawsuit because they finally realized that big tech companies have the power to influence large people en masse. Okay, when election time comes, these guys can pretty much filter information to their heart's content. They can do whatever they want and then worry about the consequences later. This is precisely why every politician is suddenly magically on board with all of this, because they realize now that their livelihoods are at stake. Now they're pretty much beholden to big data companies out there. And that's one of the reasons why this lawsuit exists. Now, at the end of the day, I'm going to literally outright say that I don't consider Google to be right in this scenario. Like, I get it. But to understand something, I have to side with Google on the fact that they do provide a very good service in comparison to other people. There is competition. You can't say that Google's the only person on the block. Listen, if you don't want Google to win, stop using their service right now. Go to fucking Bing.com, use Bing every single day of your life. If you find out that Google's better, well, that's just the free market right there, ladies and gentlemen. But I think it's very obtuse that Google is like, I'm not saying misleading about this, like they're not misleading anybody, but it's very like deliberate in keeping this certain information away that in terms of a monopoly, let's be goddamn real about it. In order to ever thrive in this industry, you have to basically be another quote unquote multi-billion-dollar tech company, okay? You want to do anything on pace with Google, you have to have billions of dollars and be willing to have businesses go on losses for years on end just to compete with Google right there. And that's a little fucked up. But ladies and gentlemen, it is what it is. That being said, I just wanted to talk about it because this stuff really interests me. If I got off on tangents, I'm sorry, but like I said, I'm very opinionated about this stuff. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it. If you dislike it, I am out.